You have to be kidding me, I asked, frozen with the final seating chart still in my hand. Sophia stood at the vanity mirror, applying a coat of lipstick, the shade of red already sharp enough to signal a warning. What part would I be kidding about, Liam? I walked into the bedroom, my voice tightening. The part where you casually place Mark at the head table, the groom's side. We agreed weeks ago that the head table was strictly for the wedding party and immediate family. She didn't even glance at me, just pressed her lips together to set the color. It's not a big deal, just move your cousin to table 4. Mark needs to be up front, she said, finally capping the lipstick. It's a wedding, Sophia, not a corporate retreat, I said, trying to keep my voice analytical steady. Mark is a sales director. I'm the groom. You know how uncomfortable it makes me when he acts like he owns the room, and now you want him sitting next to my mother? I see Mark more than I see you some weeks, given how late you stay at the firm, she said, finally turning to face me, arms crossed over her silk robe. You'll get over it. I stared at her. So that's it. Just change the layout 3 days before the wedding, and tough luck for me. Sophia rolled her eyes, brushing a dark wave of hair over her shoulder. Why are you making this about you? You're being so insecure. That line, that one, lit a fuse in me. Because I built this entire event for us, I said, my voice louder now, I designed the lighting, I paid for the venue, I even agreed to that ridiculous raw bar Mark suggested, which you know I hate. I've compromised on everything, she scoffed. Don't act like you're suffering. It's just a dinner. My jaw clenched. And you were fine with the family-only rule until this morning. Well, logistics evolve, she said coolly. Mark's been going through a rough patch with his commission targets. He wanted to feel included. Emotional support, you know. He's my work husband, Liam. He's important to me. Did you even tell him no? Did you even tell him we had a seating plan? She paused, checking her reflection one last time. No, I didn't think it was worth the drama. I blinked, the paper crinkling in my grip. Wow. So now it's not just about inviting him. You didn't even stand up for our wedding. 3 weeks earlier, the air in our apartment felt different. It wasn't the cold silence of a finished argument, but the humid, oppressive weight of a storm waiting to break. We were sitting at the kitchen island, the marble surface buried under heavy cardstock invitations, RSVP spreadsheets, and color swatches in shades of champagne and ivory that looked identical to me. Mark needs a +1, Sophia said. She didn't look up from her phone, her thumb scrolling rapidly through what I assumed was her work email. I paused, my pen hovering over the spreadsheet. Mark? Your sales director? Yes, Mark, she said, finally glancing up. Her eyes were bright, too innocent. He thinks he might be bringing that new girl from HR, or maybe just a friend. He wants options. It's a plated dinner, Sophia. At $300 a head, I said, keeping my voice neutral, the way I did when explaining to a client why they couldn't remove a load-bearing wall. And frankly, I didn't think he was making the A-list cut. We talked about keeping the numbers down. Sophia set her phone down face up. The screen lit with a notification. Mark, work. She didn't flinch. Of course he's A-list, she said, reaching for her wine glass. He's my work husband. He's practically the reason I haven't had a breakdown this quarter. He covers for me when I need to leave early for cake tastings. He gets me coffee when I'm drowning in press releases. You should be thanking him. I thanked him by not complaining when you went to that team-building happy hour last Friday that went until 2 a.m., I replied. The words tasted sour. I hadn't meant to say them. I prided myself on being the secure partner, the one who didn't need to check timestamps. But Mark was different. Mark was a boundary pusher. He was the guy who put his hand on the small of another man's fiancée's back a little too firmly, a little too long. Sophia let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. Oh my God, are we doing this again? Doing what? The jealous fiancé act. It's not cute, Liam. It's actually kind of pathetic. She took a sip of Pinot Noir, her eyes locking onto mine over the rim. Mark is loud. He's flashy. I get that he's not your type of person, but he's harmless. He's like a brother to me. Like a brother. That phrase sat in the room between us, heavy and false. Brothers didn't text you wine emojis at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. Brothers didn't make jokes about how lucky I was to have snagged you before they could. I just don't like the way he talks to you, I admitted, my grip on the pen tightening until my knuckles turned white. It's disrespectful to us. To the wedding. Sophia sighed, a long, exasperated sound that made me feel small. She stood up and walked around the island, wrapping her arms around my neck from behind. I could smell her perfume sandalwood and rose, and for a second, I wanted to lean into it. I wanted to believe her. Babe, she whispered against my ear, her tone softening into that charismatic purr that made her so good at her job. You are the one I'm marrying. You are the one I'm building a life with. Mark is just noise. Fun. Work noise. Don't let your insecurity ruin this. You're better than that. You're the confident architect, remember? The man with the plan. She kissed my cheek, lingering just long enough to brand me. Let him have the +1. It keeps him distracted so I can focus on you. I looked at the spreadsheet. Logic told me it wasn't worth the fight. If I pushed, I was the controlling partner. If I let it go, I was the supportive husband. Fine, I said, writing Mark plus guest on the line, but tell him to behave. I always do, she smiled, walking back to her side of the island. I returned to the list, but the numbers blurred. My gut was twisting, a distinct, primal warning signal flashing in the back of my mind. I ignored it. I told myself I was building a marriage on trust, not suspicion. I didn't know then that I was pouring concrete over a sinkhole. It was a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks before the wedding, when a structural engineer canceled our 4 p.m. site visit. I could have stayed at the firm, buried myself in blueprints for the new mid-rise project downtown, but a sudden, uncharacteristic urge to see Sophia pulled me toward home. I wanted to surprise her. I wanted to prove to myself that the gnawing pit in my stomach was just pre-wedding jitters, nothing more. I unlocked the door to our apartment quietly. Usually, the space smelled of eucalyptus and the faint, crisp scent of the oversized design books stacked on the coffee table. But today, as I stepped into the foyer, a different scent hit me heavy, musky, and expensive. It was a cologne I recognized instantly because I had choked on it every time I was forced to shake Mark's hand. It was distinct, aggressive, the kind of scent that announced a man's presence before he even spoke. Sophia? I called out, my voice sounding hollow in the hallway. No answer. The living room was empty, but the throw pillows on the couch, the ones I wasn't allowed to move, were disheveled, dented in the center as if someone had been sitting heavily. I walked past them, the scent of Mark's cologne growing stronger near the sofa, clinging to the fabric like a stain. I moved into the kitchen. The island was clear, but in the stainless steel sink, 2 wine glasses sat waiting to be rinsed. One had the faint crimson crescent of Sophia's lipstick on the rim. The other was clean. My heart hammered a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I touched the rim of the clean glass. It was still wet. Liam? I turned. Sophia stood in the doorway of the bedroom, wrapped in a towel, her hair damp. She looked startled for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression of panic that vanished so quickly, I almost missed it before settling into a wide, relaxed smile. You're home early, she said, walking toward me. I was just hopping in the shower. I thought you had that site visit. It got canceled, I said, watching her face closely. I thought I'd surprise you. She kissed me, damp and warm, smelling of her body wash. It masked the cologne in the air, but not in my memory. That's sweet. I missed you. Did we have company? I asked, gesturing slightly toward the sink. I smell cologne. Sophia didn't even look at the sink. She laughed, a light, airy sound that usually charmed clients into signing contracts. Oh, that? No. I was testing out a new bottle of wine Mark sent over as a congrats gift. I poured 2 glasses thinking you might come home for lunch, but you didn't, so I drank mine and dumped yours. Sad, right? And the cologne? I think the maintenance guy was in the hall earlier, fixing the AC unit, she said, shrugging effortlessly. The vents must have carried it in. You know how thin these walls are. It was a lie. It was a fluid, practiced, architectural marvel of a lie. The maintenance guy didn't wear $300 designer fragrance. And I knew Sophia didn't pour wine for me at noon on a Thursday. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something structural inside me snap. It wasn't a loud break. It was the silent failure of a support beam under too much weight. The trust, the foundation I prided myself on, collapsed into dust. "Right," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it was made of glass. "Must be the vents." "I'm going to dry my hair," she said, turning back to the bedroom, confident she had smoothed over the crack in the facade. I waited until I heard the hairdryer start up. Then I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, terrifying clarity. I didn't need reassurance anymore. I needed data. I opened the Amazon app and typed in hidden camera phone charger. I selected overnight delivery. If she wanted to treat our home like a stage for her lies, I was going to make sure I had a front row seat to the performance. The alert came at 1:42 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was in my office, staring at the rendering of a cantilevered deck for the Henderson project, trying to focus on load distribution. My phone buzzed on the desk, face up. A single notification from the Wise app. Motion detected, living room. My heart did a strange, painful somersault. I told myself it was probably the cleaning lady, or maybe Sophia had come home early to grab a package. But my hands were cold as I reached for the phone. I didn't want to open it. I wanted to live in the ignorance of the previous minute, where my biggest problem was a client who wanted imported Italian marble for a guest bathroom. I tapped the notification. The video feed buffered for a second, a spinning white circle against a black screen before snapping into high-definition color. The wide-angle lens of the charger camera caught almost the entire living room, the gray sectional I had spent 3 Saturdays researching, the abstract painting Sophia's mother had gifted us, and the mid-century coffee table. And then they walked into frame. Sophia was first, laughing, her head thrown back in that uninhibited way she reserved for her closest friends. She was wearing a cream silk blouse I recognized from our engagement photos. Behind her was Mark. He was wearing a navy suit, no tie, the top 2 buttons undone to show a hint of chest hair. He looked comfortable, too comfortable, like he owned the place. "God, he is so uptight lately," Sophia said, her voice crystal clear through the tiny microphone. She tossed her purse onto the armchair, my armchair. "He actually asked me about the wine glasses the other day. Can you believe that? He thinks I'm stupid." Mark chuckled, a low, arrogant sound. He walked up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her flush against him. "To be fair, babe, you aren't exactly subtle. Leaving the glasses in the sink? Rookie move." "He bought it," Sophia said, turning in his arms to face him. She ran her hands up the lapels of his jacket. "He buys everything I tell him because he wants to believe it. He's manageable. That's why I'm marrying him." Manageable. The word hit me like a physical blow to the sternum. I wasn't a partner. I was a project, a safe bet, someone to pay the mortgage while she got her excitement elsewhere. "Manageable," Mark repeated, smirking. He kissed her neck, his hand sliding down to grip her hip. "Does he know how lucky he is that I let him have you on weekends?" "Shut up," Sophia murmured, but she didn't pull away. She leaned into him. "He's good on paper, Mark. He's stable. He's going to be a great dad one day. You're the fun one, the one who gets me." "I get you," Mark whispered, his mouth moving to her ear. "I get all of you." I watched in paralyzed horror as he lifted her onto the edge of the sofa. They didn't even bother to go to the bedroom. They started right there, in the middle of the afternoon, in the home I paid for, on the furniture we picked out together. The sounds, the rustle of clothes, the soft moans, the wet, sickening noise of their kisses filled my office through the phone speaker. I slammed the phone face down on the desk, the crack of the screen echoing in the quiet room. A wave of nausea rolled over me, hot and acidic. I stood up, stumbling slightly as my legs felt like they had turned to water. I made it to the small wastebasket under my desk just in time. I retched violently, my body trying to purge the toxicity of what I had just seen, what I had just heard. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, shaking uncontrollably, my vision blurred with tears of rage and humiliation, manageable, insecure, good on paper. I looked back at the phone. The recording light was still blinking. They were still there. I didn't turn it off. I let it record. Every second, every betrayal, every laugh at my expense. I needed it all because I wasn't just going to leave her. I wasn't going to let her spin this into a story about how I was jealous and controlling. I was going to take the evidence, the undeniable, high-definition proof of her cruelty, and I was going to make sure everyone saw exactly who she was. I picked up the phone, my grip so tight I thought the glass might shatter in my hand. The builder in me was gone. The architect who valued stability was dead. In his place was something cold, something hard, something structural that would not bend. I saved the clip, then I saved it again to the cloud. The wedding was in 3 weeks, and I had work to do. I met David at a dive bar across town, the kind of place with sticky floors and dim lighting where nobody asks questions. It was late, the Tuesday night crowd sparse. I slid into the booth opposite him and placed my phone on the scarred wooden table. "You look like hell," David said, his usual easy grin vanishing instantly. He pushed a beer toward me. "Drink, then tell me." I didn't touch the glass. I just unlocked my phone, opened the gallery, and pressed play. I turned the volume low, but in the quiet bar, Sophia's laughter was unmistakable. David watched in silence. I saw the moment realization hit him. His eyes widened, then narrowed into a hard, angry squint. He watched until the end, until Mark made a comment about my boring taste in furniture, and then he pushed the phone back across the table as if it were contaminated. "Jesus, Liam," he breathed, rubbing a hand over his face. I don't even have words. In your own house?" "On the couch we picked out together," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "The one she made me wait 6 weeks for because the fabric had to be perfect." David slammed his hand on the table, rattling the salt shaker. "You have to end it. Call her right now. Tell her it's over. Tell her to get out. I'll come with you to pack her shit." "No," I said quietly. "No?" David stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "Liam, did you see that? She's mocking you while she screws another guy in your living room. You can't marry her." "I'm not going to marry her," I said, meeting his gaze, "but I'm not calling it off tonight either." David frowned, confused. "What are you talking about? You can't let this go on. Every second you stay with her is humiliating." "If I end it now," I said, leaning forward, "she spins the narrative. She's in PR, David. It's what she does. She'll tell everyone I got cold feet. Or that I was paranoid and controlling because of her friendship with Mark. She'll cry to her parents, to our friends. She'll be the victim of a broken engagement, and I'll be the unstable ex-fiancée who couldn't handle her success." David opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He knew Sophia. He knew how charming she could be, how effortlessly she could rewrite reality to suit her image. "She wins if I do that," I continued, my voice hardening into something cold and jagged. "She gets the sympathy, she gets to keep her reputation, and Mark gets to be the shoulder she cries on." "So, what's the alternative?" David asked, his voice low. "You walked down the aisle knowing this?" "I walked down the aisle," I confirmed. "I let her have her perfect day. I let her wear the dress. I let her think she's won. And then, when everyone is watching her family, her boss, Mark's colleagues, I show them exactly who she is." David stared at me for a long moment, searching my face for any sign of hesitation. He found none. The architect who built stable structures was gone. In his place was a demolition expert. "You want to blow it up at the wedding?" David whispered, a mix of horror and awe in his eyes. "I want to burn the fantasy down so completely that everyone sees the ashes," I said. "I want there to be no spin, no he said, she said. Just the truth projected in 4K. David took a long pull of his beer, then set the glass down with a definitive thud. A slow, grim smile spread across his face. "Okay," he said, "if we're doing this, we do it right. I'll handle the tech, you handle the performance." "Deal," I said, finally picking up my drink. It tasted bitter, but it was exactly what I needed. The plan was set. Now I just had to survive the next 3 weeks of lies without cracking. The week before the wedding was a masterclass in deception. I had to become the very thing I despised, a liar. Every morning, I woke up next to Sophia, smelled her perfume, listened to her chatter about floral arrangements and seating charts, and forced a smile that felt like it was carved from ice. "Are you excited?" she asked over coffee on Wednesday, her eyes wide and innocent, as if she hadn't been mocking my boring taste in furniture just days prior. "Can't wait," I said, stirring my black coffee. "It's going to be unforgettable." Thursday brought the rehearsal dinner. We held it in the private room of an upscale Italian restaurant, the kind with white tablecloths and candlelight that Sophia insisted was romantic but understated. My parents were there, beaming with pride. Sophia's family flew in from Milan, loud and affectionate, treating me like a son. The guilt of what I was about to do to them sat heavy in my gut, but then I saw Mark. He strolled in late, wearing a suit that cost more than my first car, laughing too loudly at his own jokes. He sat 2 seats away from Sophia, close enough to brush against her arm every time he reached for bread. "To the happy couple," Mark announced halfway through the meal, standing up with a glass of Chianti in hand. The room quieted. My father smiled politely. Sophia beamed, a flush rising on her cheeks that I now recognized as guilt masked by thrill. "Liam, you're a lucky guy," Mark said, his gaze sliding over me with a predatory glint. "Sophia is. She's one of a kind. Passionate, driven, and let's be honest, way out of your league." Laughter rippled through the room. A joke. Just a friendly ribbing. I felt my hand clench around the linen napkin in my lap until my knuckles ached. "But seriously," Mark continued, his tone shifting to mock sincerity, "I've watched you two grow together. It's inspiring to see a love that's so transparent. So real. Cheers to that. Transparent." The audacity of it was breathtaking. He was toasting to my ignorance in front of my own family. He was celebrating his victory over me while eating on my dime. I stood up slowly, raising my glass. The room waited for my response. Sophia looked at me, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She sensed something, a tension in my jaw, a sharpness in my gaze, but she dismissed it. "Thank you, Mark," I said, my voice steady and dangerously calm. "Transparency is everything to me. You have no idea how right you are." I drank. The wine tasted like vinegar. Later that night, back at the apartment, Sophia was giddy. "Did you hear Mark's toast? He really likes you, Liam. See? I told you he was harmless." "He's certainly something," I replied, turning away to hang up my jacket so she wouldn't see the disgust on my face. "You're still tense," she said, coming up behind me to wrap her arms around my waist. "Relax, babe. The hard part is over. Now we just get married." I pulled away gently, feigning exhaustion. "Yeah, just get married." I went into the bathroom and locked the door. I stared at myself in the mirror. The man looking back was tired, hollowed out by days of pretending. But in his eyes, there was a cold, hard resolve. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small silver USB drive. It felt heavy in my palm, heavier than the ring I had bought her. 3 weeks of footage, hours of betrayal compressed into a few gigabytes. It was my insurance policy, my weapon, my truth. I put it back in my pocket. "Soon," I whispered to the reflection. "Just one more day." The morning of the wedding was crisp and gray, the kind of day that looks beautiful in photographs but feels ominous in reality. I woke up before Sophia, slipping out of bed while she was still curled under the duvet, oblivious to the fact that her world was about to end. I grabbed my suit bag and headed to the venue early, telling her I had last-minute vendor checks to handle. The venue was a restored cathedral with stained glass windows that cast fractured rainbows across the empty pews. It was stunning. It was expensive. It was a stage. I found the officiant, a genial man named Reverend Clark, with a booming voice and a kind face, setting up near the altar. He looked up as I approached, a warm smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Ah, the groom," he boomed, extending a hand. "Nervous?" "Focused," I said, shaking his hand firmly. "Can we talk for a moment, privately?" His smile faltered slightly at my tone, but he nodded, leading me into the small vestry off to the side. The room smelled of old wood and beeswax candles. Is everything all right, Liam? He asked, concern etching his brow. I need a favor, I said, reaching into my jacket pocket. I pulled out an envelope thick, white, unsealed. Inside was cash, a lot of it. And I need your discretion. He looked at the envelope, then back at me, confused. I don't understand. The marriage license? I said, my voice low and unwavering. It needs to stay in your car. It doesn't get signed today. Not by us, not by the witnesses. Under no circumstances does that paper become legal. Reverend Clark stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. Liam, you can't be serious. The ceremony isn't binding without it. The guests, Sophia. Sophia has been sleeping with one of her guests in my home for the last 3 weeks. I said flatly. I have video evidence. I am not marrying her, but I am going through with the ceremony. The color drained from his face. He looked at the envelope again, then at the cross hanging on the wall, as if seeking guidance. I'm not asking you to lie under oath, I continued, pressing the envelope into his hand. I'm asking you to perform a play. A very convincing one. You say the words. We say the vows, but legally, today never happened. And if anyone asks later, it was an administrative error, a lost document. We'll deal with the fallout then. He hesitated for a long, agonizing moment. Then, slowly, his fingers closed around the envelope. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and respect. I'm sorry, son, he whispered. Truly. Don't be, I said, turning to leave. Just make sure that license stays in the glove box. It will, he promised. I walked out of the vestry feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The legal trap was disarmed. Now, all that was left was the performance. I checked my watch. 2 hours until showtime. I went to the groom's suite, poured myself a scotch, and waited. The texts started rolling in. Congratulations from friends. Can't wait to see you. Messages from family. Each one was a tiny stab of guilt, but I pushed it down. They would understand soon enough. David arrived 10 minutes later, looking sharp in his tuxedo, but pale. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it. Is it done? He asked. It's done, I said, taking a sip of the amber liquid. We're not getting married today. You sure about this? He asked one last time. I've never been more sure of anything, I replied. Let's go get dressed. The organ music swelled, filling the vaulted ceiling of the cathedral with a heavy, resonant sound that vibrated in my chest. I stood at the altar, hands clasped in front of me, watching the massive oak doors swing open. The congregation rose in a rustle of silk and wool, turning to watch Sophia float down the aisle. She was breathtaking. The dress was a masterpiece of lace and tulle, hugging her curves before cascading into a dramatic train. Her face was framed by a delicate veil, her eyes shimmering with what looked like genuine emotion. She smiled at me, a radiant, hopeful smile that made my stomach twist. For a fleeting second, I wondered if I was the villain in this story. Then my gaze drifted past her to the second pew on the left. Mark sat there, leaning back with an arrogance that clashed with the sanctity of the space. He caught my eye and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. A smirk played on his lips. The sickness returned, hot and sharp. No, I wasn't the villain. I was the executioner. Sophia reached the altar, her hand trembling slightly as she took mine. Her skin was warm, soft. Hi, she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. Hi, I replied, my voice steady, betraying nothing. Reverend Clark cleared his throat, opening the leather-bound book with a solemnity that would have earned him an Oscar. He spoke of love, of partnership, of the sacred bond between two souls. I listened, dissecting each word for irony. Then came the vows. Sophia went first. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her bouquet, her hands shaking so much the flowers quivered. She took a deep breath, looking directly into my eyes. Liam, she began, her voice cracking, from the moment I met you, I knew you were my safe harbor. You are the kindest, most loyal man I have ever known. You ground me when I drift. You build me up when I crumble. Today, I promise to be your partner in all things. to stand by your side through every storm. To be honest, faithful and true, for as long as we both shall live." A tear slipped down her cheek. In the front row, her mother dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. Even David looked away, uncomfortable with the sheer weight of the lie. "Faithful and true," I repeated in my head. The words felt like shards of glass. Then it was my turn. I didn't have paper. I didn't need it. I had rehearsed this moment 100 times in the dark of our bedroom while she slept beside me. "Sophia," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room, "you are unforgettable. You have taught me so much about trust, about perception, about the difference between what we see and what is real." She smiled, thinking it was poetic. "Today," I continued, locking eyes with her, "I vow to return that lesson. I promise to be exactly the husband you expect me to be, to see you clearly, without filters or illusions. And I promise, from this day forward, to treat you exactly as you deserve." The audience let out a collective awe, mistaking the double edge for devotion. Sophia squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with love. She didn't hear the threat. She only heard the promise. "I do," she whispered. "I do," I said. Reverend Clark pronounced us husband and wife, with a finality that echoed through the silence. We kissed a chaste, lingering press of lips that sealed the deception. The applause was thunderous. We walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, smiling at the sea of faces. I glanced at Mark one last time as we passed. He wasn't clapping. He was watching Sophia with a possessive, knowing look. Enjoy it while it lasts, I thought. The reception is going to be a killer. The air in the reception hall was thick with the scent of lilies and roast beef, but all I could taste was bile. I stood at the head table, the microphone cold in my hand, watching the room settle into a hush. Sophia beamed beside me, her hand resting possessively on my arm, blissfully unaware that the ground beneath her feet was about to open up. "Roll tape," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. The massive projector screen behind us flickered to life. The room cooed as a montage of our greatest hits, began photos from our first date at the art museum, selfies from our trip to Paris, candid shots of us laughing over pizza. The music was a soft acoustic cover of "Can't Help Falling in Love." It was perfect. It was everything Sophia wanted her life to look like, curated, enviable, flawless. Then, the music stopped. The screen went black for a heartbeat, just long enough for a confused murmur to ripple through the crowd. When the image returned, the quality was different. Grainy, wide angle. The timestamp in the corner read 3:42 p.m. 2 days ago. The acoustic guitar was replaced by a crisp, high-definition audio track. "God, he is so uptight lately," Sophia's voice echoed through the hall, magnified by the professional sound system. On screen, she walked into our living room, tossing her purse onto the chair. Beside me, Sophia went rigid. Her hand dropped from my arm as if burned. "He actually asked me about the wine glasses," the recording continued. "Can you believe that? He thinks I'm stupid." A gasp went through the room, starting from the tables nearest the screen and spreading outward like a shockwave. Then Mark walked into the frame. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. He was laughing, that distinct, arrogant laugh that grated on my nerves. He wrapped his arms around Sophia from behind, pulling her flush against him. "To be fair, babe, you aren't exactly subtle," Mark's voice boomed. "Leaving the glasses in the sink? Rookie move." At the head table, Mark stood up so fast his chair screeched against the floor. He looked at the screen, then at me, his face draining of color until he looked like a ghost. "Turn it off," Sophia hissed, grabbing for the remote in my hand. "Liam, turn it off right now." I stepped back, out of her reach, my eyes locked on the screen. He buys everything I tell him because he wants to believe it. "The on-screen," Sophia said, turning in Mark's arms. "He's manageable. That's why I'm marrying him." Manageable. The word hung in the air, heavy and damning. The video cut to them kissing wet, sloppy, desperate sounds that filled the silent room. Then Mark lifted her onto the edge of the sofa. Sophia let out a strangled cry, covering her mouth with both hands. Her mother, seated at table 1, dropped her champagne flute. It shattered, the sound like a gunshot in the quiet. Mark scrambled away from the table, knocking over a centerpiece. He looked like a trapped animal, his eyes darting to the exits, but the doors were blocked by confused waiters holding trays of filet mignon. "Does he know how lucky he is that I let him have you on weekends?" the Mark on screen asked, his hand sliding up Sophia's thigh. "Shut up." The on-screen Sophia murmured, "He's good on paper. You're the fun one." The video froze there, on a close-up of Mark's hand gripping her hip. The silence in the room was absolute. It wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum, sucking the oxygen out of the space. Every eye, hundreds of them, was fixed on the head table, on the bride who had just vowed loyalty, on the best man who had toasted to friendship, and on me, the groom who had just pressed play. I looked at Sophia. Her face was a mask of pure terror. The carefully constructed facade of the perfect bride had shattered, leaving only the ugly truth underneath. "Liam," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please." "Please what?" I asked, my voice calm, almost conversational. "Please pretend I didn't see it? Please be manageable?" I turned to the crowd. My hand was steady, my heart was ice. "I think we've seen enough behind the scenes," I said into the microphone. "Don't you?" Sophia's hand clamped onto my forearm, her nails digging in through the fabric of my tuxedo jacket. Her face was a ruin of smeared mascara and desperation. "Liam, stop! It's not what it looks like!" she screamed, her voice cracking into a hysterical shriek that echoed off the high ceilings. "Turn it off, please!" I looked down at her hand, then at her face. For 3 years, that face had been my sunrise. Now, it was just a distorted reflection in a broken mirror. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt nothing. Just the cold, clinical detachment of a surgeon removing a tumor. I pulled my arm away slowly, deliberately, as if removing a stain. She stumbled back, losing her balance in her heels, catching herself on the edge of the table where our untouched wedding cake sat. "It looks exactly like what it is, Sophia," I said, my voice low but amplified by the microphone still in my hand. "You made your choice 3 weeks ago on our couch. Today, I'm just letting everyone see the receipts." Mark, who had been frozen like a deer in headlights near the exit, suddenly found his voice. "This is insane! You can't do this, man! It was one time!" "One time?" I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Mark, the footage runs for 40 minutes, and that was just Tuesday." The room gasped again. Sophia's father stood up at table 1, his face purple with rage, but whether it was directed at me, Mark, or his daughter, I couldn't tell. Her mother was sobbing into her napkin. My parents just stared, stunned into silence. I turned back to the crowd. I didn't see guests anymore. I saw witnesses. I saw the jury of peers I had needed to convict her in the court of public opinion. "I know some of you are wondering about the legal mess this is going to be," I said, addressing the room calmly. "The division of assets, the annulment, the sheer waste of a perfectly good reception." I paused, letting the weight of the words settle. Sophia was shaking her head frantically, mouthing, "No, no, no." "Don't worry," I continued, looking directly at her. "There won't be any lawyers, because we never signed the marriage license." Sophia froze. Her eyes went wide, the color draining completely from her face. "That's right," I said, enjoying the look of absolute shock. "Reverend Clark was kind enough to leave it in his car. Legally, this ceremony never happened." "You're not my wife, Sophia. You're just single." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd. Someone at the back started to laugh, a sharp, shocked sound. "And Mark," I added, turning to face him one last time. He was sweating now, tugging at his collar. "Since you enjoyed the hospitality of my home so much, I figured you could handle the bill for tonight. I've already transferred the venue contract to your name. Consider it a gift." I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a heavy thud, the feedback screeching for a split second before cutting out. Silence. I turned and walked toward the double doors. David fell into step beside me, his face grim but satisfied. We didn't look back. We didn't run. We walked out with the steady, measured pace of men leaving a demolition site before the dust settles. Behind us, the room erupted. Shouts, crying, the crash of a table overturning, the sound of a life imploding. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped into the cool night air. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with oxygen that tasted clean, sharp, and undeniably free. "So," David said, loosening his tie as we walked toward the parking lot. "Drinks?" "Drinks," I agreed. "And maybe a new couch." And that, my friends, is how I walked out of my own wedding reception, single, debt-free, and finally, truly awake. Sophia tried to call me a dozen times that night, but I blocked her number before I even got to the car. Mark got stuck with a $35,000 bill for a party he ruined, and last I heard, he's still trying to explain to HR why his work wife just cost him his reputation.
Sometimes, the best revenge isn't anger, it's just letting everyone see the truth in high definition. If you enjoyed this story of sweet, icy justice, do me a huge favor. Smash that like button. So, what are your thoughts on this matter? Please share your thoughts in the comment, and more so share this with someone who needs a reminder to trust their gut. And please subscribe to our channel for more stories of people getting exactly what they deserve. See you in the next one.